Hello, welcome to this session on grace and parent-teacher communication. My name is Maureen Van Den Berg. I work for the American Association of Christian Schools, and I'm thrilled to be able to share with you today just some things that I believe are important as we communicate with teachers in our role as educators. For a little background, I was a teacher for about 8 years in Indiana in a Christian school. I taught high school and absolutely loved it. And then the Lord moved me to the Washington, D.C. area to work in the legislative office for American Association of Christian Schools. And now I have 2 little girls who are in school, so I'm on the parent side of things. And so I have an even greater appreciation for the importance of good communication between parents and teachers. But I also recognize, having had experience as a teacher, that sometimes that communication is rather challenging and difficult. In fact, I know many excellent teachers who have told me that one of the most challenging parts of teaching, though they loved it, they loved the teaching career, one of the most challenging parts were the parents. I've had many veteran teachers tell me that communication with parents has grown even more challenging in recent years. Whereas 20, 25 years ago, if there was a child with a problem with a student, the parents would come in and say, what can we do to help the child? And now the parents come in and say, what is wrong with the teacher that my child's not doing very well? And so I recognize there are challenges and that a whole workshop could be given just to parents on how to communicate well with teachers. But since this workshop is for the Teachers Convention for you all in California, we're going to stick to some points that possibly could help teachers in their communication. And so I've titled it Grace in Parent-Teacher Communication, because I think this word grace will aid us in so many different ways as we seek to be good communicators with our parents. And for a key verse, we're going to look at Ephesians 4:29, which says, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace to the hearers. And we're going to look at that verse a little more in depth as we get into this topic of grace and parent-teacher communication. If you're like me, you recognize 2020 as being quite a year, one that no one would expect. And just when you think, wow, this has really been something, another national tragedy or natural disaster or a health issue arises or something personal happens, in addition to this COVID pandemic that we're all working through and having to respond to in one way or another. And so grace is a very important part of our lives, or maybe I should say a very needed part of our lives right now, and certainly is very important in our communication. Before we delve into some key principles and points, I thought a good understanding of the word grace, probably almost all of us have studied it or understand what we mean, but let's look at the definition just to help us all be on the same page. I loved when I looked it up in Merriam-Webster's dictionary that there were 2 or 3 different definitions, but the first one had to deal with the grace that comes from God. And I just loved that Webster's dictionary recognized that. And I put that here, grace defined. And if you have a worksheet in front of you, it's also on the worksheet. But the first definition was that grace is a virtue coming from God. It's a state of sanctification enjoyed through divine assistance. So it's the idea that it's a gift from God. Some of you may have learned a definition for grace that uses the letters in the word, God's riches at Christ's expense. And it's a virtue that God gives us and grants us as we live day to day and strive to become more like him, sanctification, but it's divine assistance. It's something we do not have on our own, that we need from him. And that understanding that the grace that we have from God, I think helps us understand the next definition, which is something we can give to other people: approval, favor, mercy, pardon, a disposition to, or an act of kindness, courtesy. When we think of it in this terms, and in terms of then communicate with our parents, we want to convey and communicate to them favor, perhaps a mercy pardon if there was a misunderstanding or wrongdoing on the part of a parent or a child, a disposition to kindness. That should be what we are known for, and courtesy. So with this idea of grace in our communication, we're going to look at 5 different things about grace, a couple of them, some principles, and then we're going to move into some specific applications. But I've used the letters in the word grace to kind of give us a little bit of a flow, Grace. So the first thing we're going to look at is the word grace, because I'm not that original for the first one, but I want grace, the idea of grace, to be our foundation, our umbrella, and permeate everything that we talk about in this session of communication. And here's why. Here's a few verses. Going back to the first verse we looked at, Ephesians 4:29, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth. Boy, that's convicting in and of itself, isn't it? But put on, this is what we put on, that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace to the hearers. Now, when we're talking about in terms of communicating with parents, we must think about who are the hearers in our communication with parents. It's parents. And it is our role as teachers, our job then, to communicate grace to our parents. Thinking back to our definition, if we go back to our definition of approval, that second definition, approval, favor, kindness, courtesy, that is what we should be communicating to our parents when we talk with them. And backing up a little bit further in that verse, Ephesians 4:29, what we are to be communicating is that which is good, to the use of edifying, building up the parents when we speak to them about their children or what we're doing in our class. But very important principle here. And note that the Bible is talking about grace in terms of communication. So the Lord also recognizes, and is the first one really to recognize, that grace should be a very important part of our communication. It's also mentioned in Colossians 4:6. Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man. I love the analogy here, the picture that is given of salt and seasoning, because I like seasoned foods, but I like little seasoning. If we season our foods too much, if we have too much salt on anything, it ruins it. It's no longer good to be eaten. It's too bitter. It's not enjoyable. It loses all of its purpose and any benefits that we could receive from it. And I think that's a very important principle to think about and remember when we're speaking, and especially when we are communicating with parents. Our speech should be always with grace, filled with that kindness and courtesy and favor. And when we have those hard, bitter moments that we must discuss something difficult, that's the seasoning. But most of our speech is filled with grace. And I think, I think of people that, I'm just always honest. You probably know people like that. Well, I'm just an honest person and I speak my mind. Well, bless your heart. Is your mind always filled with grace? I think and we'll learn, our next verse talks about we should be honest, let not mercy and truth forsake you. Truth should be a part, but so should mercy. And if you combine that principle in Proverbs 3 with Colossians 4:6 and Ephesians 4:29, I think you'll see that honesty must always be accompanied with mercy and with grace. And if there's too much of the harsh, then we're missing something. And our communication with our parents as teachers, our communication with them must start with this idea of grace and ministering grace to the hearers. If you'll notice in Proverbs 3:3, let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck, write them on the table of thine heart, not just truth, but mercy as well. My dad has often said, if you're going to err on the side of mercy. And often you will communicate the love of God more if that is where you err. Of course, we should always strive for truth, but we've got to remember that merciful aspect. So that's the letter G, grace in our communication. And the Bible specifically talks about having grace in our communication. Then we move on to R. And for R, I thought of relationships and the respect that we must show in relationships. The most important relationship in this whole equation of parent-teacher communication is not between the parent and the teacher, but between the parent and the child. The parent-child relationship is a God-ordained relationship that we as teachers must respect. This relationship, because it is God-ordained, is more important than the teacher-student relationship and more important than the teacher-parent relationship. But if we respect the fact that the parent-child relationship is God-ordained and most important, we then convey a natural respect to the parents, which will aid in the grace that we are communicating to them. As Christian school teachers and Christian teachers, we must remember that our mission is to support the parents and their God-ordained role. Many Christian schools have a mission statement, and it will say something to the effect of, our goal is to support parents in their God-ordained role in raising up godly young people. And they might embellish it a little bit or flourish it. But the idea in many Christian schools that I work with and that we have in AACS is that we are here to help parents. Parents are the most important people responsible for their children. It's not just a right, it's a responsibility, it's a privilege, and it is ordained by God. And so we respect that. Our mission is to support it, and our goal should be to work together with the parents to help students achieve success. I think this is one principle, one of the main principles that sets Christian education and Christian schools apart from government-run public education. Many leaders in the public education realm, I don't say all, but many have this philosophy that they know better than the parents what is good for the children. And that is one reason why so many public school systems and so many teachers' unions are opposed to any kind of school choice opportunities, because they don't recognize the parents of having any good knowledge or the right knowledge of how students or children should be educated. They know that. The state knows better. What do parents know? And that's why you also see a big push among many on the left who want to add, required education for preschool. And in some areas, birth to kindergarten, birth to third grade in some places, because they recognize, or they say, we know better than the parents. The parents don't really know what they're doing. But as Christians, we recognize that the Bible teaches that once a child is born, the most important relationship in their life until they become an adult is between them and the parent. And we as Christian school teachers have an opportunity to support that, to build. Hopefully they're learning biblical principles at home, to build on that. If they're not, to help maybe come alongside the parents and help that. Now, I will give one caveat here in this respect for this relationship, and it's one that we probably would all recognize, but I feel I should say it. There will be, or hopefully not will, may be times when you see that there's foul play going on at home, maybe in terms of abuse. And then we do have a responsibility before God and before the law to stand up and to speak out. But in most cases, our job is to come alongside the parents and help them. Sometimes this means also teaching the parents some things or sharing with them that they may need to know, recognizing that they're the ones that God has put in charge of this child. I think of the first grade teacher who's taught for years and years and years, and one year got a child that was particularly problematic. This is a true story. A lot of misbehavior problems, struggling with her academics. And as the teacher continued through the year, realizing that the child doesn't have a learning disability, and the child is completely able to obey, but there was a lack of, and then in talking to the parents, realized there's a lack of discipline at home. And in further conversation, realizing that, well, the parents don't really know how, and their philosophy was a bit, just let her do what she wants to do. And that was, reaping problems in school. And of course, you can imagine problems at home. But this teacher came alongside, rather than coming down hard and criticizing always the child, took it as an opportunity to come alongside the parents and say, here's something you can try. She can do. I've seen her respond well when there are consequences, when I've helped her learn to obey. And why don't you try these things at home? And there was a real difference throughout the year as the parents were learning, and then learning how to be the parent for their children, and the Christian school teacher was able to come alongside. So even in situations where there is an initial disagreement, there is always opportunity for the teacher to show this respect of the relationship between the parent and the child. And even when the teacher has to communicate difficult things to the parents, there's always an opportunity to show this respect. And I believe with all my heart, this will give a real opportunity to show grace in our communication with the parents, and to then further advancing God's principles and his work in the kingdom. So that's R. Let's move on to A. G is for grace. R, respect and relationships. A, approachability. Being approachable. Boy, that's a challenge, because we don't often see ourselves from the outside in. We're usually looking inside out until people give us some feedback. I want us to pause for a moment and think about one person in your life. We probably have all had one person who is not approachable. What was it that made us nervous to approach that person about a question, even with a question or a comment or a suggestion or a concern. Maybe that person conveyed an attitude that they didn't think we had much to say, or they were convinced they had the right things to say. Maybe it was that person had been very explicit in their words that they weren't willing to listen. But we can think of the reasons why. Now, I want you to go to the other end of the spectrum, and hopefully there's someone in your life who has been very approachable. I know I have had some of both. And the ones who have been approachable didn't always agree with everything I said or didn't always grant every request I had. But I always felt like I had been heard. I felt like they had valued not just what I said, but me as a person. And they were willing to move forward, to continue to keep our relationship positive, but also to look for ways to make everything better. This is the kind of attitude we want to have. We want to communicate towards our teachers. Being approachable means not just in our words, saying, oh, you can come to me anytime, but also in our attitude when they come to us, expressing that we are glad they're there. My mother was a great example of this. She taught for over 25 years until the Lord took her home a couple years ago. And she was adored by parents and students alike. And it was evident at her homegoing service. There were hundreds of people that came, former students, parents of former students, because she just had a way to communicate to you when you walked in her room that you were the most important person in the world to her right then. And her face would light up. She usually would welcome you with her hands and then say, hello, and just made you feel like $1,000,000. And it didn't take an extended conversation. She just exuded this positive, pleasant, cheerful, I'm glad you're here attitude. And I often try to channel that, especially when I don't feel that, try to channel her attitude. But words we can also say. We can thank parents, always thank them right off the bat. Thanks for communicating this to me. Welcome their feedback. Listen to what they have to say. Even if we think we already know what they're going to say, let them say it. Listen to them. When a person listens, it conveys great respect. It also shows that you are approachable. And then if you can't meet their request or whatever they're asking, you can't quite incorporate that, explain to them why. Even if they don't understand, they will appreciate the fact that you took the time to listen and that you have a reason for it. They might not agree with it, but there's a reason, so they can go with that. I've had a lot of parents tell me, I talked to the administrator, I talked to the teacher, I get it, I wish you wouldn't, but I get it, there's a reason. I've also had others that said, talk to an administrator, and he did listen, and he did change, and they appreciated that. But in all these cases, the administrator was approachable by listening and offering feedback to them. And then thank the parents for communicating. That's not a misprint on there twice. I actually did mean to put it on there twice, once at the beginning and once at the end, because I think it's always good to end any conversation with thanks again for their communication. It just, again, conveys that you respect their relationship as the parent of the child. You care about them as a family, and it also just conveys that attitude of grace. So that's A, approachability. C, now we're going to move into some real practical things, not necessarily principles, although in a way it is, but it's also a little more practical. Current communication. Practice 3 things here. First of all, practice regular communication. If you're an elementary teacher, have some form of weekly communication with the parents. It might just be the weekly letter that you say, this is what we're covering in these subjects, here's where the tests and quizzes are, here's the birthdays. I know a lot of elementary teachers have a little form that they just fill out every week, and every Monday or every Friday it goes in the folders. That's communication. That's letting the parents, hey, this is what's going on. I want you to know. When you get into the upper level, I don't know that a weekly communication is necessary. There's a lot of different teachers for each child, and each child is involved in different activities, probably in high school. But there could be a quarterly progress report, something that at least communicates the grades, if nothing else, or hey, we have this big project coming up. And there's a balance, because you want to put responsibility on the student for communicating some of these things and for getting things done. But you also want to establish some form of communication with parents. Now, in all transparency, this was an area I struggled with as a teacher. I was a high school teacher, high school English and drama. So I had all the high school students, which was a lot of kids. It was English, so it's a lot of grading. And I struggled with regular communication, and it caused a few problems sometimes. Parents would come back, they'd get the report card, and they would say, I had no idea that my student was struggling so much. Well, if I had done a better job, and I had to learn to do a better job, giving more frequent progress reports, at least, hey, every 2 weeks I'm calculating the grades, and notice your child, hasn't turned in 5 or 6 assignments. Good communication, regular communication always helps convey grace, convey that you respect them, you're approachable, and it also helps with that shared goal of helping the student achieve success. So it can be done. The second thing is responding to a parent's communication. Make it your goal to always respond to whatever, a question, a phone call, a text, whatever it is, to always respond within 24 hours. Even if it's a situation where you might not have an answer, at least respond letting them know, hey, thank you for your email. I'm going to work on this and I'll get back to you. Or thank you so much. I'm going to check on this and I'll get back to you. Always let them know you've heard them, you're working on it, and you'll get back. There's from a parent standpoint, and I've been blessed with some great teachers for my girls, but on the rare occasion when there hasn't been a response to a question I had, I've thought, what do I do? They haven't responded. How do I get a hold of them? Did they not get my question? Do they not care? Is this not important? You will avoid a lot of those problems when you can respond in a timely fashion to a parent's communication. It just conveys all these things we've been talking about. And then the third thing is when there are difficult issues, perhaps a discipline problem or some attitude issue or just a hard thing that happened at school, communicate right away. Doesn't mean you have to drop everything right that moment, although sometimes that might be the most appropriate. But always try to communicate within the day, that evening, if you can. I just wanted to let you know something that happened at school today. I knew you'd want to know. But then again, always add with, I'm so glad he or she, Johnny or Sally, I'm so glad they're in my class. I love having them here. I want to work with you to solve this. But communicate right away, and then go back to allow them to talk to you, always keeping in mind the goal is to support them as the parents as they are rearing the child. Now, I do want to add one caveat that's not on our screen and not in your notes. It is okay to set boundaries for yourself, especially in this era of COVID, where some schools might still be online, some Christian schools, maybe some Christian schools are doing both in person and you also have online options. I know the school where my girls go have that option, and parents or teachers, I should say, are facing a bit of a challenge because the parents who have the students at home online might have lots of questions and are communicating and texting at all different times of day whenever their kids are tuning in. And the teacher is trying to help them, but also trying to teach a classroom full of children. It's very important that you feel the freedom as a teacher to set boundaries for yourself. Perhaps say to your families, you can contact me at any time. I probably won't respond after 6 on a weekday. That's completely understandable and reasonable. You have a life, you have a family, you need rest. Your job is not 24/7, although probably sometimes it feels that way. But it's okay to set boundaries. But within the times that you said you are available, be available. Respond right away. Shoot a quick text. Make sure you keep that regular communication going. And I know that will aid very much in the communications between the parents and the teachers. And then finally, for letter E, have an established mode. And again, this is a very practical point. There's no Bible principle here, but something that I've thought as a parent is helpful and perhaps could also help a teacher. Determined the best mode of communication for you, and then communicate what that is to your parents. Is it email? What's the best way to get a hold of you? Email, text, phone call? Another form, when my daughter was in kindergarten, they had Class Dojo. I had never heard of it before, but it's some little program and each kid gets a little avatar monster, but they're cute little fuzzy monsters, so they're not scary. And that's how the teacher helped the kids keep track of behavior points, and that's how she communicates. She could send pictures through that. She sent text messages and email messages. That was her program. That was the way to get a hold of her. And it worked for her. And that's how she communicated with the parents. And we learned how to communicate with her. I know some teachers are like, well, I just want to be available. So whatever is easiest for you. Here's my email. Here's my phone number. You can text me. Some schools have a special communication system. You can text me through that. Don't do that. Don't leave yourself wide open for that. And again, this is simply my opinion, but I think it's much easier for the parents. From my personal parents' perspective, it's easier if the teacher just says, here's how you can best reach me. I will stick with that. If it's texting, I can text you. If it's email, I will email you. But if you give me all kinds of options, it's too much. And then you're putting yourself as a teacher in the position of having to check all these different places every day if you want to stay current. And you have the opportunity actually to miss something. Whereas if there's one mode of communication, my daughter in second grade this year, her teacher has a texting system. It's not her phone number. It was one of those sign up with this 5-digit number to this 5-digit number. And suddenly I'm on the second grade texting list, and she can send out a class text, and then she can receive an individual text from me just on the same number. And it's wonderful. She can send out a quick, we have a spelling quiz this week. Don't forget to send the progress report back signed. I can text real fast. Katie's going to be sick today. I'm going to keep her home. And she can respond right away. It's one mode, and she sticks with it, and it's worked out really well. So my encouragement to you, letter E, very practical, pick one mode, communicate what that is, and then be current in that. Keep up with that. Simplify it for your life, for their lives, and just keep with that. And I think you'll find makes it easier. So those are the 5 things that will help us all have grace, I think, in our communication. Remember the verses of grace. Put them in front of you. Memorize them. Respect the parent-child relationship. Show this by listening and then communicating that respect, that you care for them. Be approachable in your attitudes and your words. Keep current in your communication with them, and have one established mode. I want to close with 4 rules of communication. Before I do that, I want to say one other thing. I recognize that there will be some prickly parents out there. You might incorporate all these things. Your life will be filled with grace, and they still respond in a prickly manner. That is human nature. And that is it. But rather than look at that as a struggle, a drudgery, which it probably is, also recognize it as an opportunity that God has put in your life to communicate his grace to those people, and ask him to give you his divine assistance, which was part of that first definition of grace, give you his divine assistance to respond to them in the way, sharing mercy and truth in a way that would please him, and also plant the seed of truth in their hearts to either bring them to Christ or bring them back to Christ, whatever the situation may be. So then in closing, I want to point you to what are known as the 4 rules of communication. Now, these are not original with me. When I taught, I was in a Christian school in Indiana, and the school was part of a ministry that had a large counseling ministry. And one of the things they taught through this counseling ministry were 4 rules of communication. And as I was preparing this workshop, I actually Googled 4 rules of communication, and all sorts of different websites from different ministries came up with this. So I got it from Faith Ministries in Lafayette, Indiana, but I recognize it is part of a biblical counseling that is often taught. But I wanted to remind you of these just briefly. There are 4 rules of communication that fit with any relationship, not just parent-teacher, but friends, spousal, parent-child, you name it. These are biblical principles that help. And I thought a good reminder, and putting these in front of us, will help incorporate these other things that we talked about. And all of these are found in the passage in Ephesians 4. We looked at just verse 29, but if you go back to Ephesians 4:25 all the way through verse 32, you see these 4 principles. The first one is be honest. Ephesians 4:25, and I did put these on the back of the handout that you have also. But be honest. Verse 25 says, and I'm reading off my notes here, wherefore, putting away lying, speak every man truth with his neighbor, for we are one with another. Always be honest. As we are incorporating grace, always speak the truth. We can do it in a way that still communicates grace, but we must be honest with what is going on. Number 2, keep current. And we already talked about keeping current in our communication, but verse 26 and 27 also hits on this point. It says, be angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath, neither give place to the devil. Now, I don't believe, and I've many things that I've read, and I think you would agree, there are some times when, we're so tired to try to resolve something when we're exhausted is rather difficult, because what we really need is sleep, and then we can resolve the problem in the morning when we're rested. But I think we notice the last part of this verse 27, or the first part that says, neither give place to the devil. If we don't keep current, if we need to sleep first and then try to take care of the problem the next day, if we don't endeavor to keep current, we are giving place to the devil to allow things to fester. And that's where bitterness grows. and hard feelings, and there's the opportunity for gossip and things just to build and grow. Whereas if we kept current and we were honest with the people, we could take care of problems right away and avoid a lot of misunderstandings. The third principle, attack the problem, not the person. Verses 29 and 30 in Ephesians 4 say, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth. We've gone over this, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers, and grieve not the Holy Spirit of God. When we have an issue, let's address the issue, not the person, so that our hearers are hearing grace and not a personal attack. A very small illustration is would be in my house, I'm always cold. My husband is always hot. He turns the air conditioning way on and walks around in shorts and a t-shirt, regardless of what the temperature is outside. I feel like I'm always wearing a sweatshirt and then a coat, and then I'm turning the heat up. If I got upset with him and said, why are you always turning the air conditioning on? You just don't care that I'm cold at all. Suddenly I have gone from the fact that the issue is I'm always cold to you don't like me. That's why you're doing this to me, when he's not doing it to me at all. So, and then he has to defend himself. That would be attacking the person rather than, hey, is there some way we can come up with a balance between the air conditioning and the heat? The problem. Now, silly illustration, I know, but yet sometimes not so silly. If I'm really cold, I'll add that. But attacking the problem, not the person, keeping it from being personal is very important. And fourth principle, act, don't react. Verse 31 and 32 of Ephesians 4 says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice, and be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. We have in these verses the put off, put on, put off all these things: malice, anger, bitterness, wrath, clamor. Put on kindness, tenderheartedness, forgiveness, remembering that we're doing it as God has forgiven us because of Christ, nothing we've done. So when we are acting proactive, showing kindness, showing tenderheartedness, showing grace, we are acting. Bitterness, malice, clamor is often a reaction to something that people have done. So these are just real great principles of communication. You could post them somewhere, remember them. And as we are seeking to minister grace to our teachers, I think we'll find these principles to come in very handy. So I close with that. And one other word to you. As Christian schools teachers, I just want to encourage you in the work that you are doing as you communicate to your students truth about the Lord each day. And then as you communicate grace to their parents, working with them to raise these children for the Lord, you are doing wonderful work for the kingdom. I often pray for the Christian schools in AACS. And when I do, I pray for you all as teachers too. And I found myself, especially this year, praying for you. And I wanted to share that with you because you have someone, and not just me, I know there are others praying for you as teachers. Every year is a great opportunity, but this year I feel the Lord has given us even greater opportunities because of COVID. What this pandemic the challenges this pandemic has brought has often, in many cases, brought greater opportunities to our Christian schools as families have sought a school that's meeting in person. So they're sending their children to us. God is bringing a mission field to us in addition to the families that we've already been ministering to. So we have an opportunity to share his gospel, to share his peace, to demonstrate to them how God's peace can calm our fears in the midst of uncertain times, to demonstrate to him how his work in us can help us communicate grace to others, and how he is the answer to all of life's ills and all the struggles that are going on right now. So be encouraged. The Lord will help you. He is with you. You are valued and appreciated. You have a great opportunity. And I believe that as we incorporate grace in our communication and ask the Lord to help us in this, that he will help us see great results and reap eternal rewards in heaven and hopefully see many souls saved for his kingdom. So God bless you as you continue your important work.